Hello and welcome to the Shining with Sierra podcast. My name is Hector Murrieta and I'm the proud principal of Sierra High School in the San Bernardino City Unified School District, and I am your host. The Shining with Sierra podcast has a vision of providing support and knowledge to the entire community, and with a vision of having students eventually hosting this podcast and leading it. But right now, I am your proud host, and I'm especially excited today to introduce our guest. I typically don't read, but I want to make sure I get it right. And I want to make sure that I do justice to Dr. Doug Reeves. He is our guest today. Thank you for being on the show today, Dr. Reeves.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
Yes, Dr. Reeves is a globally recognized expert in education leadership, school improvement, and equity. Dr. Reeves is the founder of Creative Leadership Solutions and has worked with many schools and districts worldwide to drive meaningful change. With over 30 books and hundreds of articles to his name, Dr. Reeves is a thought leader in areas such as effective grading practices, equity and excellence, and sustaining school improvement. His research-based approach has influenced countless educators, and his insights continue to shape how schools create lasting, positive outcomes for students and schools. Beyond his work as a researcher and consultant, Dr. Reeves is a former classroom teacher and school leader, bringing both academic expertise and real-world experience to the conversation. His passion for education is deeply personal, and today we'll get a chance to learn not just about his expertise, but also about the challenges he may have faced and the lessons he has learned along the way. So once again, thank you, Dr. Reeves, for being on Shining with Sierra.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I leave anything out? Is there anything you want to add?
I'm sure we can fill in as time goes along.
Okay, good. I want to make sure.
A lifetime in education has a lot in it.
Oh, absolutely. And so I wanted to be thorough, but I'm sure I could take up a whole bunch of time. I'll be very specific. But well, let's start with that. Tell us about the student, Doug Reeves. Were you always a stellar student as a kid or as a youth?
Oh, I'm not quite sure I'd say that. My mother, who is 102 years old and taught for free all of her life, her mother was the first woman superintendent of schools in the state of Illinois, so I have a long heritage. But she saved all of my report cards. And I worked hard. High achievement was expected in our family. But on my 6th grade report card, in big block letters, the teacher said, "does not work up to potential." So I'm not saying it was smooth sailing for me, but in general, I loved school and I loved my teachers. And, with a couple of exceptions here and there, things went pretty well.
Wow. Well, see, there you go. That's certainly something I didn't know. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers probably didn't know that. So, as you grew up and you went to school, you became an educator. Was there an experience as a student that led you to that profession? Because you went beyond just being a practitioner. You're now a researcher, consultant. But I mean, was there a moment or something that made you think, this is what I'm going to do?
No, I revered my teachers, and I saw what an amazing influence that they had on me and on all the students. And I was lucky enough to grow up in a family that where we had family dinners every night, and we would read after dinner. So it was an atmosphere where knowledge and learning was really important for all of us.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful. So you obviously took that into your practice and in your schooling. So you do your schooling after high school. You knew you wanted to be a teacher?
Not necessarily. I knew that I wanted to see the world and experience new things. I was actually recruited to join the debate team, and I'd never been on a jet airplane before. So the first time I was on a jet airplane was a recruiting trip, and the coach sat in my parents' living room for about 3 hours and said, "You send this boy to our school, and I'll promise you 2 things. He'll never join a fraternity, and he'll stay out of trouble, and he'll get to see the world." And he kept his promise.
Wow. So from an early start, you got to travel and do those types of things. Is there something? Is there a memory that in particular that stands out?
Oh,
when you were doing that?
so many memories. They were really a wonderful team. That was an area where the university chose to invest a lot of its resources, and so they recruited all over the country. So I met this fascinating group of teammates. all of whom went on to incredibly successful careers. Some are judges and doctors and lawyers, politicians. They just are, and to this day are an extraordinary group of people, and I was really proud to be with them. And of course, when you travel around the country, you get to debate against other teams. We were a small state school, and nothing is more delicious than having other schools like Harvard underestimate us, and then we beat the pants off of them. So that was that was a fun experience.
So it's not like one memorable experience. It sounds like you had
Exactly.
many. Wow. And well, and speaking of Harvard, so you ended up at Harvard, right?
Yes.
I mean, so you started at, like you said, a small state school,
Right.
and then you ended up at Harvard. Did you end up as a student there, or as a
Yeah, I was in what's called the Principal Center. It's sponsored by the Graduate School of Education. So I
Got
was
it.
not an official full-time faculty member, but because my research had focused on success in high-poverty schools, and that was a real interest of the Principal Center at Harvard, I was oftentimes asked there to speak at their gatherings where they'd bring in school administrators from all over the world.
That's wonderful. So you got to beat them, then you got to join them.
Yes.
So wow. So okay. So you experienced that, which I mean, gosh, that alone is very memorable. And then you went into teaching at that
Right.
point.
I did. I had several different teaching experiences, and over the course of my career at every level, from the primary grades to postdoctoral students. But initially, I was a middle school math teacher, finished my doctorate, and then taught at the university level for a couple of years. But what I really enjoyed doing was not the typical university fights over parking places and offices. I had the opportunity to design some accountability systems, which is where I really cut my research teeth. And within a couple of years, had left my university position and built this organization, that first the Leadership and Learning Center, and now Creative Leadership Solutions, where we simply go into schools, find out what works, and share the results of that research, around the world.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I can speak for us at Sierra High School. We're blessed to have Creative Leadership Solutions work here with us through the San Bernardino City Unified School District. I know you've been a partner of the school district now for many years.
Yeah, 7 or 8 years at least.
Right. Yeah, I remember in one, you did a professional development. You led a professional development with principals, and I remember it was at that time that I approached you and asked you. And I don't expect you to remember. You meet a whole bunch of people, but I know for me, the book that changed my practice in the classroom grading was Ken O'Connor's.
Yes.
Dr. O'Connor's How to Grade for Learning. And I asked you at that moment, I said, hey, are you familiar with him? You're like, yeah, I co-published with him.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know.
He's a good friend and has been for many years.
Wow.
And we both write books and articles about effective grading.
Right. Yeah, I know for me as a teacher, and we share that. I was a math teacher as well at the high school level, though. I've always been a high school guy. I remember for me, it was over a Christmas break, and it just bugged me that I felt that my failure rates were way too high, and I thought I was doing what I should be doing, and then but I knew I needed to change something. And I remember picking up that book. I don't remember how I came across it. I just remember I came across it, and that Christmas break, I went back that second semester, and it just transformed my approach to grading. So I mean, on that, since we're on that topic, it's a good segue. And you, like you said, you work with a lot of schools, school districts across the nation, across the world. What is your research telling you about effective grading practices? What works? What doesn't?
It's very straightforward, and unfortunately, the reason grading reform is stuck in many schools and school systems is that people make it too complicated. And they do this exhaustive book studies, and I've seen schools in California spend 5 years studying it and make not one single change.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people in education take simple things and like to make them complicated as if that's going to impress somebody. My group does exactly the opposite. We take complicated things and make them simple. So on the subject of grading, there's really only 2 big things to do. And number 1, don't use the average. You trust the teacher to make the final determination at the time the grade is awarded on how a student is performing against the California standard. Because they don't come here or any other school just walking on water and having everything all figured out. They struggle. Then, thanks to your teachers, they get feedback. They struggle some more, get feedback, struggle some more, get feedback, and finally they wind up here. And my argument is you evaluate them on how they finish the race, not all the struggles that came before the finish line. Imagine this. One of your students wins the state track championship, and she's on the podium getting ready to receive that gold medal because she's just run a 4-minute mile, and somebody taps her on the shoulder saying, "Sorry, kid, we're taking that gold medal away because you fell down in practice 3 months ago." Now, that's crazy talk in that context, but that is exactly what happens when we take students who are getting D's and F's to their final grade, even though they're doing B and A level work by the end of the semester.
Right.
It's how you finish that counts. So number one, don't use the average and trust teachers. And number two, even in this district, I've seen a dramatic change. Do the practice in class, not at home. A lot of our students have jobs, a lot of them have families, and it's simply unfair to think that everybody goes home to a nice, quiet place and has perfect transportation, has a 2-parent family that'll help them get everything done. It's just a false assumption. And I've seen teachers in this system dramatically reduce their failure rate when they just do the homework in class. And they're standing up at whiteboards, standing up at easels. They get feedback from other students. They get feedback from the teacher. It's kind of like a great music class. They leave every math class knowing I'm a little bit better than when I started. That's the way we ought to do practice, because every teacher in America believes we assign homework because kids need practice. But we need to ask the next question: what is good practice? Good practice is feedback. Good practice is the opportunity to use that feedback and get better. That doesn't happen at home. So those two things, that's it. Not a 400-page book study, nothing complicated, none of these elaborate computerized scales. Doesn't make any difference. What I care about is that the grades are accurate and fair. Do those two things, you will see failure rates drop like a stone. Just last week, I was in a California school where with those two things alone, same teacher, same kids, same assessments, same everything, their math failure rate in 9th and 10th grade went from more than 50% to 7% in 1 year.
Yeah, you're right. In my practice now that I've been an administrator for many years, right, when people stick to those, like you say, simple practices, it's transformational in the classroom, and it could help create a fearless school, and we'll probably get to that. So in your practice, did you learn that when you were a teacher, or did you have an aha moment?
It was just kind of intuitive to me.
Right.
A lot of my students were recent immigrants. A lot of them didn't speak English. But I could watch this daily struggle by them and their parents, and sometimes because they were recent arrivals, 2 or 3 families living in a 2-bedroom apartment. That's not an environment where you're going to get a lot of homework done. And so, and I could watch that struggle and watch the satisfaction that they took in getting better and better and better. So no, I didn't have a particular system. It's just, but some of those kids were getting some of the best grades that they had ever received.
Right. And how did you? So you're a middle school math teacher. How did you launch? You mentioned you were working on your doctorate. Is that how you launched into the research aspect of it and the consulting?
I had finished my doctorate. Actually, the story of that first engagement was that I was moonlighting, because of course we were all broke, teaching test prep classes in the weekend for teachers and administrators because they had to pass the administrator's exam. And there's a woman in the back of the room who had just moved from Tennessee. She was deputy superintendent of a system there. And at the end of the test prep class, she said, "Looks like you know a lot about assessment. Would you like to come do consulting for our district?" That was the first gig. And then as a result of that, got invited to a very large urban district that's where I first developed the 90-90-90 schools, where we had a large group of schools, more than 160 to work with. And usually 90% poverty, 90% minority, meant about 10% meeting standards.
Right.
But I found the 90-90-90, 90% poverty, 90% minority, and 90% meeting standards, and asked, what's different about those schools? And that was really the research that put our group on the map.
Right. Yeah, you took a deep dive into that, because I know many times, and you probably come across this, where someone may say, "Okay, great, I'll implement those 2 simple practices. So yeah, it may drop my Fs, but how do I know that it'll play out, so to speak, with test scores or standardized test scores?" Do you get challenged with those?
Of course, and it does in a couple of respects. First of all, if you ask people why do we have low scores, a lot of it is, well, they don't show up to school, and they can't learn anything if they don't show up. And I've heard, or their discipline's out of control, and I've heard all those sort of things. All these issues are related. You want better attendance, have fewer Fs. Because I've watched this. In March and April of every year, when a student says, it doesn't make any difference what I do, I'm going to flunk anyway, why would that student ever come to school? Or if they do have to come to school, why would they behave well? So you want better behavior, have fewer failures. You want better attendance, have fewer failures. And you want better state test scores, kids got to be able to come to school and got to be motivated to know that they can get better. So the direct answer is yes. Now, test scores, as we know, is one measure, but it's a measure that a lot of people look at, including legislators. So you got to take them seriously. But I really encourage schools to have multiple measures to show their communities how they're doing and tell their story, because if we don't tell our story, nobody's going to tell it for us.
Right. Thank you. And I know in my experience, I've learned that there's probably nothing more visceral than grading. So, I mean, just kind of getting into why do you think grading is so visceral for people?
Well, frankly, I think the way that a lot of external consultants approach it is insulting. You know, I know better than you do, even though I haven't been in a classroom for 30 years, and I'm going to tell you how to do it. Teachers are insulted by that, and rightly so. My approach is completely different, saying, I trust you. In fact, you remember the guy Dwight from The Office, who kind of looks a little like me sometimes, and Dwight was a jerk. I asked him to imagine that Dwight is the computer programmer for their electronic grading system. He doesn't know anything about education, doesn't know teaching, doesn't know your students. Who are you going to trust? You going to trust Dwight, or are you going to trust the classroom teacher? Now, when I approach it that way, that starts with a level of respect for the classroom teacher, not insult. And that's how I think my approach and the approach of my colleagues is substantially different. Moreover, I think, to be fair to teachers, they've got college degrees. They were successful. They wanted to get A's, and they know how to do it. And they kind of wonder, why can't my students today be like I was?
Right.
Well, they're not like you were. But there's nothing. You want to see teachers burst with pride. It is to take a student who is struggling and then have them succeed. And you want to see teachers be insulted and disappointed. It's when they sit there in a dark auditorium or a workshop for 6 hours, just feeling insult after insult after insult. Make it easy. Just trust teachers, get rid of the average, do the practice in class, and dispense with all the complexities that I see happening in this subject all around the country.
Almost like respecting the dignity of being a teacher, you know, of having that experience, that expertise.
You know, it's interesting to hear you say that. When you were asking what people don't know, I taught in China for a couple of years, and when you're a teacher in China, it is like clergy in the South. Everybody, you may not be making any money, maybe living 8 to a room, but man, they know you're a teacher. It is yes, sensei, no sensei, whatever you say, sensei, and the operating assumption is that the teacher is a professional. So sometimes people will say, well, Doug, why can't we have scores like they do in Shanghai? And I'll say, when we start treating teachers with the respect that Shanghai teachers are regularly treated with. And wherever I have the opportunity to make that case, and to parents as well, not just to students. Students need to hear that, but parents do too.
Right.
We want to keep more teachers in our profession and attract more to them. The number one thing that they want is respect.
You know, and I'm going to thank you. And I'm going to add one more group to the list you mentioned. Administrators. What advice would you give to an administrator, whether up and coming administrator or a veteran administrator, regarding that? Because many times we set that tone as well.
Well, instructional leadership is more challenging now than it's ever been, and part of that is the enormous turnover that we had, especially in high poverty schools and especially as a result of COVID. The national data say that 53% of teachers would quit if they could. In rural areas, it's as high as 65%.
Wow.
And so we talk about instructional leadership, but when we rush teachers through these certification programs, we need instructional leadership now more than ever. And I don't mean a 30-page checklist, thanks very much to the State Department. No, what I need is two things. Number one, for administrators at the building level to have a crystal clear view of what effective instruction is. And that's not an easy conversation, whether it's a new or veteran administrator. Sometimes I'll hear words like, well, I know it when I see it. And what I as a teacher need, I need you as my leader to really lay it out clearly and do it simply with one page and say, Doug, this week I'm going to be looking for checks for understanding. I know there's 30 things that I could be looking for, but when I come into the classroom, I'm looking for checks for understanding. Or next week, I'm looking for engagement. I want you to devise ways to get 100% engagement, kind of like primary teachers do. You know, secondary teachers don't often get to observe a primary class. And you walk into a primary class, they are masters at this, and they don't just pose a question and wait for hands in the air. They pose a question, everybody gets a minute of think time, they write on their whiteboards, and then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, boards up. Oh, you disagree with Hector, tell him why he's wrong. And a rich discussion among the students. You see in those great classes a lot more student talk and less teacher talk. And yet in secondary classes, it's much more common to have a lot of teacher talk and a little bit of student talk. Now, one thing that distinguishes your school, of course, is your commitment to career education, where there's much more oral processing. You know, what do I know and how do I know it? And I wish every class, whether we call it academic or career, would be like a great career education class where it's hands-on and lots of student engagement.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly something we work on all the time, especially here at Sierra High School, where we, we get new students every 6 weeks. So we create, it creates a fascinating, dynamic there. But, from a leadership standpoint, going back to that, we could very much be critical in setting that tone,
Yes.
for the school. And I mentioned earlier, so maybe that can, it's a good segue to get us into fearless schools.
Yes.
Tell us about fearless schools and,
Sure.
and the concept of fearless schools.
Fearless Schools is about creating an environment, whether it's the faculty room or the classroom, where it's safe to make a mistake. The background of the research comes from Professor Amy Edmondson at the Harvard Business School, and she did all of her work in medical care, has been doing it for 30 years. So Dr. Edmondson asks this provocative question. She says, Doug, which hospital do you want to go to? One with a high error rate or a low error rate? I'd say, well, shoot, Dr. Edmondson, I want to go to that low error rate hospital. Wrong, she says. They both had the same error rate. The low error rate hospital just sweeps their mistakes under the rug and nobody learns from it. In a high error rate hospital, or in a high error rate hospital, it doesn't make any difference if you're the surgeon, smartest person in the room, or if you're a tech, or if you're a nurse, anybody can call out a mistake because they know that it's safe to do so and that they all learn from it. She's replicated that in airline safety, in a lot of other areas, and I took her research and applied it to schools and said where it is safe to make a mistake and everybody can learn from it, you have better learning by students and better learning by adults. Let me illustrate with an example. I have a colleague, Dr. Mike Wasta, former special education teacher, ultimately superintendent of schools. And when he was superintendent, Dr. Wasta would send out what he called oopsgrams. He said, here's the 3 biggest bloopers I made this last month. Now we can all learn from it. And when a senior leader is willing to talk about mistakes so we can all learn, makes it a lot safer for everybody else to do. Similarly, in classrooms, when teachers use equity sticks, that is random calling, I don't care what the nomenclature is, not just hands in the air, but everybody has an equal opportunity to be called on. They can do so, and a lot of teachers are afraid to do this. Oh, what if she has a meltdown? Wait a minute, make it safe. Hey, if you don't know the answer, you can phone a friend. You can answer a question with a question. You can give me a partial answer. What you cannot do is check out in my classroom and have your head in the desk and never participate. In classes that are willing to engage in that fearless environment, and when there's a wrong answer, you don't just turn away and go somewhere else. You stay with the student so we can all see learning happening in real time. And by the way, again, career tech ed does that brilliantly. You make a mistake, you don't turn away, we stay with it and learn from it. Because you are talking about what employers want. When I've surveyed employers, number one thing they want is students who can take feedback and apply that feedback to get better every single day. And your teachers, of course, do that brilliant.
Yes, some of the feedback we've gotten from our partners is, and it's a word that describes what you're saying, is adaptability.
Yeah.
I know one of the key characteristics that like a common thread is that adaptability.
Exactly.
And it's like you said, it's taking what you have and running with it.
Exactly.
Well, that's pretty fascinating. So, do you have any? You don't have to mention names in particular, but have you seen some examples of fearless schools and what are their characteristics? I mean, when you go to a campus like that, What's the look and feel and sound of it?
Well, it does start with leadership, and let me be as specific as I can, because I know your audience does not like generalities and
Right.
grand theories. So, for example, if we want more interaction in a classroom, starts in a faculty meeting. So I've watched, for example, a principal who will come in and say, "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Here are the announcements. Read them at your leisure." That's it. 5 seconds spent on announcements. All the other time is getting real work done. And it may be, today we're going to create a common rubric for writing across the discipline, or today we're going to work on a common assessment, or today we're going to look at real student work individually at first and then as a group and see if we agree on whether it's proficient or not. In other words, real work happening. Lots of teacher engagement and involvement in that meeting, not just the principal reading announcements. Because it kind of doesn't make sense to say, I want more student talk, and then the faculty meeting is all principal talk.
Right.
So that's one example. Another thing that I've seen, and this is how a teacher transformed a science class. His name is Eric, and he used to give these 45-minute lectures. And Eric is brilliant. I've watched him. He's internationally known as a science teacher. And you know science teachers, they love to set things on fire and
Right.
blow them up and break
Literally.
things. Kids love it, yeah. and he get awards. But he said one day, I realized the kids just weren't learning as much science. And so what he changed was what he called the egg timer. 3 minutes. Here's one concept, not 13 concepts in a lesson. One concept, 3 minutes. Ding goes the egg timer. Okay, here's a challenge. And you got 3 minutes, students. You can work alone or you can work with a partner. 3 minutes. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, ding. Now, whiteboard's up. Let's see who disagrees. Let's see what we've learned. And you can see learning happen in real time. Now, just 2 footnotes to this. Eric was able to document significantly improved science performance by a student. And secondly, he started doing this when he was in his 60s. So I don't want to hear anybody say, I've been doing this for 30 years and can't
Right.
change, when Eric
Right.
can do it.
Wow.
And I might add, just parenthetically, this is not one of these high poverty techniques, because Eric teaches science at Harvard. He's taught all over the world, but what I have learned is that the very best techniques in the very best schools are also the very best technique in a high poverty school.
Right.
Don't let anybody tell you there's something special that we ought to be doing. Feedback is feedback. Relationships with students are relationships with students.
Right.
Those are the guts of what we need to do.
Absolutely. And a common thread that I'm noticing, and you keep saying it, is simple. Keeping it simple. Simple, whether you want to call them techniques or strategies or, practices, but they're simple.
Yeah.
Nothing very extraordinary. And, being consistent with it. Hey, going back to, do you have any recent bloopers that you want to share?
Oh my goodness, yes. And when I give public presentations, I always make a point of saying, beware the researcher who is always conveniently right.
Right.
They always find data to support their ideas. So
Right.
I'll give you 2 examples of hypotheses that I had that were not supported by the evidence, and I always share them publicly, and I've shared them in my writing as well. Let's go back to what you said about grading. My hypothesis was that if we could just be specific enough about our expectations, then all of our grades should be similar. And so I created this portfolio, same kid, same attendance, same discipline, same homework, same quizzes, same test performance, same everything, identical in every respect. And then I would give this portfolio to teachers independently and see if they could come up with the same grade. And I was astonished to find out that the very same student with the same performance, the same everything, might get, depending upon the teacher's individual system, an A or a B or a C or a D or an F. It's like you're going to a basketball game and every period the rules of the game change. And there's different numbers of people on the court and different shapes of the ball and different height. Kids won't play a game if they don't know what the rules are.
Right.
Well, I continued that study until I was over 10,000 teachers and administrators. Same results. Could have been an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F. So the bad news is that my hypothesis was wrong, but the good news is it makes a pretty compelling case that present grading system is not about student performance. It's about wildly different teacher systems. So that was one mistake. Another mistake that I talk about frequently is, and that leaders have to deal with this a lot, they'll start a new initiative. Schools and districts are famous for cranking out new initiatives. And I thought, well, our hypothesis is that if they implement this initiative a little bit better, student achievement ought to get better. So I started plotting on 36 different both behavioral and academic programs, student achievement gains on the vertical axis and degree of implementation on the horizontal axis. So I had like level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and my hypothesis was, hey, a little bit better implementation ought to get you higher levels of student achievement. Again, I was dead wrong. You go from level 1 to level 2, nothing happened. Level 2 to level 3, nothing happened. Level 3 to level 4, where we have evidence of impact on student achievement, then big things happen. But here's the problem, Principal. We almost never get to level 4. Because here's what happens, and you see this all over the country. Level 1, level 2, level 3, well, that didn't work. Let's go buy another program.
Right.
Level 1, level 2, well, that one didn't work either. Let's go buy another program. We don't persevere and stick to it to get all the way to level 4.
Right.
So I learned something from that. But
Yeah.
that was. I'll just give you one other where I've had to learn a thing or two, and that's how schools change. The old model, and you can see tons and tons of leadership books on this. First you got to get buy-in from everybody. No, you don't. When a principal tells me I've got buy-in from all my teachers, I tell the principal one of two things is true. Either A, you're not asking for change, or B, all the arguments are happening out in the parking lot. And it happens all the time. So let's stop thinking you have to have buy-in. What we need is a respectful conversation, asking for a fair experiment. For example, you and I are math teachers. First time my principal comes in and says, Doug, I want you to do writing once a month in math class because there's evidence that says writing will help math scores. I'm not going to say, thank you, principal, for that thoughtful research insight. I'm going to say, sir, I'm a busy guy. I already got a curriculum. I'm not a writing teacher. I don't buy into this. And here's what I want the principal to say. Doug, I know you don't buy in. I respect that. I'm not asking for buy-in. I'm asking for a fair experiment. Now, you choose the day, you choose the prompt, but once a month, write about a graph that they're doing. Write about, on a released test item, why is a wrong answer wrong? Or for that matter, create their own item. I just want writing once a month, and you choose how to do it. And then at the end of the year, let's see if, as a result of writing, the experience of your class is similar to the research that I've been reading, that writing in math improves math performance. But I know, Doug, you don't buy in. I respect that. I'm just asking for a fair experiment. Then at the end of the year, if we see some good results, then I'll ask you for buy-in. I just think that's a much better way than bringing in the inspirational speaker and begging and pleading for buy-in, which just doesn't happen.
Right.
Teachers are skeptical, and they have a right to be skeptical.
Absolutely. Well, and as a former superintendent would say, the higher you go, the less truth you get.
Yeah.
So we may think we're getting buy-in, if we go up front.
Yeah.
But in reality, maybe we're not. Like
Yeah.
you said, the conversations are happening in the parking lot.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your candor and your humility and accepting those. But again, it goes back to that fearless school. In a fearless school, you could have that conversation. You can, that math teacher can tell the principal,
Right.
I'm not feeling this. Well, hey, let's just give it a fair shot. And both, there's that trust.
Yeah.
To go ahead and give it a shot. And the teacher will trust that, hey, if it doesn't work, he's going to back off, or she. But at least, it's given a fair shot.
And we can model that in our faculty meetings. We
Right.
want more divergent thinking and student discussion.
Right.
Students, especially adolescents, are very social. They don't like being perceived as somebody who criticizes one of their peers. You literally have got to divide them into groups and say, here's a claim, you take this side, you take that side, and be ready to debate it out using the evidence that you've,
Right.
or tell me why some evidence is more credible than others. Well, if I expect to see that in a classroom, I ought to be doing the same thing in a faculty room where
Right.
divergent thinking is the rocket fuel of adult learning, but it doesn't come easily to people. You got to be willing to say, hey, faculty, let's try two different approaches to this. And I have an ulterior motive because right now our country needs to be able to see people who can disagree with each other and we're still friends at the end of the day. I want to encourage those kind of friendly, professional disagreements.
Sure. Yeah, it's okay to debate.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's okay to disagree. It doesn't mean, we don't like each other or we just don't agree on this and we're expressing our views.
Exactly.
Yeah, we need to get back to that. Gosh, well, this is fascinating, Dr. Reeves. I don't know about you, but I can keep going. But what, as we close, which of your books would you recommend if somebody wants to start taking a dive into this? What would you recommend? Hey, start with this one.
Yeah. Fearless Schools is a recent one, and I would certainly start with that. There's also a member of that a set of books called Fearless Grading. So if they're especially interested in grading and want a simple approach to that, I would look at that. And I've written more than 40 of them, so there's a wide section to choose from.
Sure.
But I think it's important to find things that resonate with them. For new leaders, there's a book that was widely published a few years ago called The Learning Leader, and I've had a lot of leaders tell me that that made a difference for them.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. Any final thoughts? Any final recommendations? Words of wisdom for our viewers and listeners?
I remember you sent me an email saying, tell people something that they probably don't know about you, and this might be relevant, particularly to a high school audience. I served in the military for 5 years. This was right at the end of the Vietnam War, and was a battery commander and then a military intelligence officer. And I hear a lot of fear about students. Well, I can finish high school, but I can't even consider college because I don't want the debt, costs too much money and everything else. If you're willing to participate in some of the wonderful military programs that are out there, whether it's National Guard, Reserve, or active duty, doesn't matter, you will get your college for free. You will learn things on the job that you will not learn anywhere else. It'll give you valuable leadership experience in your late teens and early 20s that you won't get anywhere else. And I know a lot of people kind of turn up their nose at military service, and I'm sorry to see that, but I would really ask people to at least consider that. And I'm not saying it has to be full-time active duty, though the education benefits, the healthcare benefits, everything else that you can get are some of the best around. I just put in that pitch, and that's not something I mention often. Most people don't know that about me. But I think for high school students who don't want to take on debt, it's something that's really worth considering. And I'll tell you, at the beginning, I was afraid that all my peers are going to get ahead of me because they'll be in the job market while I'm still in the military. Well, the rest, as you know, is history. I've had a pretty successful career.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the people that I met were simply extraordinary, and the lessons that I learned were as well.
Well, thank you. There you have it, everyone. As we draw to a close, I want to thank Dr. Reeves again for joining us on the show. For all of our listeners, you heard it. We have just a wealth of wisdom here, and we're very blessed that you were on the show today, Dr. Reeves. And to our listeners, thank you once again for connecting, and we'll see you next time on the Shining with Sierra podcast. Have a blessed day. Thank you.